Our speaker today, which is turning, I think it's listed as how to turn for furniture in particular. He's going to talk about making a three-legged stool. He's going to cover the basics. I'm going to let him discuss all that. But anyway, I want to introduce Michael Anderson. He's been turning since the age of 15. And he's won awards for excellence at 3 AAW symposia. He's won the high school division in the 2016 Turning for Future National Competition. Was featured in an article in the February 2016 issue of American Woodturner. He's also demonstrated at a Rocky Mountain Symposium 2016-2019, and his newest tribe is in New Mexico Woodturner, and he also does a fair amount of volunteering. I got to know Michael when we had the pleasure of helping out at a different Explore event than the one Bonnie was talking about. That's a class for teaching young people how to woodwork. And so Michael and I spent a better part of a week together assisting with that. So without further ado, let's give Michael a warm welcome here.
Start with the pain to get these on. Good morning. How you guys doing? Great. What I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be turning in the components for a stool. Due to time, I'm only going to do one of each component. So who in the room owns a lathe? Raise your hand if you have a lathe. So a few of you. Awesome. And so I figure most of you here have at least somewhat of an interest in turning, right? Absolutely. Cool. So I'm going to be covering most of the basics, and if you guys have any questions about any of this, just let me know. But without further ado, I'll just go ahead and get started and start making some chips. And also, if you guys take a look at the stool, there is some issues with it. This is a great conversation piece of some things not to do, which I'll be covering earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and take this, and I'm going to pass that around, and you guys can take a look at it and make fun of me. and I'm going to start off today by doing we're going to do a basic practice piece, but instead of using a standard piece of wood, we're going to do a split turning. So this piece of wood is two pieces of cherry that I glued together with a piece of real thin cardboard in between. So after the turning, I can take that and split that in half and create two halves of a spindle. Couple things about the split turning part. This case, I used cardboard. You can also use brown paper, which is a bit thinner and it's a stronger joint. But in this case, because I have this real big spur center, so when I have this on here, the force, it's kind of locked down because I have a cup on either side. So the actual durability isn't all that important, and it's really easy to split these. So I went ahead and picked the cardboard. One trick if you're doing split turnings, make sure your centers, this one has a spring-loaded tip, so the tip pushes in, so it's not actually sinking into the wood. And over here, I have this center right here with, this has a retractable point as well, but it's fixed with a little set screw. I just have that set out just a little, and with I went ahead and drilled a little section in here so it's not actually pressing into the wood. Because that's the quickest way to split these open is if you have one of the big cone centers and just drive that into the center, you'll split it immediately. Yes, you got a question?
What type of glue did you use?
Type Bond 3.
That was a messy glue job.
Yeah.
You told me to bust your balls over it.
Cool. Also, when you're doing a split turning, there always is a little chance of something flying off, so face shields are always a good thing. And if everybody knows John Ellis, and if John Ellis knew I was turning without a face shield, he'd kick my ass. Because yeah, he was the safety chair for the National Organization for Turners. So, one trick here is always spin your piece to make sure you're not hitting the tool rest, because that can get pretty ugly pretty fast sometimes. You can tear things up that way. Make sure everything's free. Start with the lathe slow. Turn the speed all the way down. Go ahead and rev it up. Alrighty. First tool I'm going to use today is a spindle roughing gouge. One thing that's really important with this tool is it's called a spindle roughing gouge for a reason. If you try to use this on a bowl, you're going to have a bad time. Because with a bowl, you have the end grain is running this way. In this piece of wood, the grain is running along here. So it would be turned 90 degrees. And because it's such a large cutting edge, what can happen is it'll bear, if you lift the handle a little bit up and that edge catches into the wood, you have a lot of surface area there. It binds, it catches really heavy. And the issue is it also has a very thin tang. So what often will happen is the tang will snap off and the tool will go shooting across the shop. So you got to be kind of careful with that.
What speed are you at there?
9. I don't know what not. Wait, this tachometer? About 3,000. So fairly fast, but it's a pretty narrow spindle. So if I were to turn that base plate for that stool at this speed, that's a little much. But in this small of a turning, it works pretty good. So when I'm starting here, I'm starting with the handle really low, and then I'm lifting the handle up until a cut initiates, and then I just rock back and forth. And one thing you can do is you can take your tool, set it on top. You see there's a balance there. That means there's still a square left. A little bit of a knock there. A little bit more. All right, let's take a look. All right, there's all this. It's all round now. So now, with it being round, I can show a little bit more how this cutting dynamic actually works. So all I'm doing is, make sure the tool is in the tool rest. The tool touches the wood, but I'm riding the bevel, so nothing's actually happening. And then I lift the handle, and a cut happens. Yeah, and back in the old days, it would just be as simple as having a rope attached to here, and like a lot of in a lot of places in Asia, they actually turn with their feet. So they have their hands powering a string, and they're just doing it like this. So luckily now things happen a little faster than that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch tools and start with the spindle gouge, and we'll start doing some beads and coves. Any questions so far? Cool. Come on, turn on. All right, I'm just going to start by rolling the bead over here. Let's start. So with rolling a bead, it's a really complicated motion. And when most people get started out, what you find instead of beads, they'll make little wedges. It'll look more like this. Because with that motion, what you're doing is you're starting with the bevel on the wood, you're rotating it over, and you're pushing straight in. And you get a little bit of a curve, but that point's still kind of pointy. This right here is not nice and rounded. because there's another motion there. It's not just in and down. If you watch the handle, that's really where you can see what's happening. It's up, over, up, and then down. It's a very complicated motion, and it takes a lot of practice to get the beads really right. And coves, on the other hand, are a little bit easier. You can just come in like this, start going, stop at the center, come over the other way, and cut down. Stop at the center, and come down the other side. One reason why you do not want to, when you're cutting down, you do not want to keep going from here, because if you keep going from here, you're going right into that end grain. And what can happen is you can get chips out here, but at the very least, you'll have kind of a lousy finish in this section. Let's see if you can see it here. You can see a little bit of disturbed grain there, but you really can't see much. But if you go downhill, you have the right, real nice, polished surface. All right, I'm going to go ahead and clean a little bit of this out. Make it look a little nicer. Do a little bit of a step here. All right. So now I'm going to do a little bit of let me see where the center of that is. I'm just going to average it out. So cool. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of an angle this way. I'm going to go back to the roughing gouge and show a couple of different techniques for that tool. So you don't have to use this tool just like this. What you can do, same way I was using that, I can put it at an angle, like this, and that improves the quality of the finish by quite a bit. So you can see the difference of real nice smooth finish versus this stuff earlier. This is great because it's slightly more accurate of a cut, and also it's easier if you're roughing through material. What I mean by that is, when you're cutting, come on, turn on. When you're cutting like this, to cut into the wood, all you need to do is put pressure into the wood. But as soon as you have it at an angle, if you put pressure into the wood, nothing happens because you're pushing the bevel into the wood. Where you actually control how much wood you remove is by the angle of the handle, because that controls the angle of the cut you're doing. So then you go forward. And also, one thing you can see is when I'm doing this, I'm not turning with my arms. So to make this cut, I'm not doing this. I'm doing this. So my hand stays locked in, and I'm just pushing forward. There we go. Like that. But how many people in the room do a bunch of hand carving? Not a whole lot? A little bit? So turning is just hand carving with a moving workpiece. So all the angles and all of that, it works just the same. Like same sort of way of using a chisel. Angles everything. But yeah. I'm going to do one more cut, clean this up here. Come this way. All right, now we're going to go back to the spindle gouge. Any questions so far? Cool.
Describe the lathe as you use.
What was that?
Describe the lathe.
Yeah.
Describe the lathe, the size, specs.
Sure. This is a Sweet 16, so it can turn a 16-inch diameter piece. And this one's the short bed, so it can only do around, I think it's about 18 inches long. But it also has this little bed extension that you can stick on this other side. And it's about at a 1.5 horsepower. But of course, this is a robust, which is pretty much the top end of lathes. So this is a $5,000 lathe. So, yeah, pretty nice machine. Roll more of a bit. That right there is a catch. So I rotated this too far, and it caught that point and skirted across. Let me take a look and see what that looks like. So yeah, so you see that nice little spiral? So in here, I over-rotated it, caught the top edge, and it threaded its way out.
Threaded it.
Yep, unintentionally threading. All right, now for the last bead. Also, another cut you can do, instead of just doing a push cut like this, what you can do is rotate the tool in the other direction and use this wing of the gouge and just do a little bit of the scraping action. And you can use that to clean up stuff. All right. So there is a vaguely symmetrical turning. I'll be showing later about how to accurately do that. Also, one thing you got to be aware with is, of course, how you're mounting it to the lathe. This is between centers. So if I were to want to make this into like a picture frame or something, I want to give myself a little bit longer on each end to give me room to cut that off. And if I were making a picture frame, I want to make sure that they were, like these beads were the same exact dimension. So I could go over to a miter saw and cut right through this bead. So in the corners of the frame, you'd have a nice round ball there. But this one's more of a practice. So I'll show you guys how to split this real quick. So you can use a chisel for this, but I'm going to use a Japanese hatchet for it.
Can you come to someplace I can?
Oh, sure. Let me take this. Where can you see? Can you see down right down
Yeah,
here?
I can do that.
Cool. Can you guys see this? Cool. Just line that up with that cardboard. Just like that. That one, actually, when I threw that one on the lathe, I did not get it perfectly centered on that cardboard, so it's a little off center. So, and that and the cardboard you can just sand off. So I'll pass one this way, and one this way. All right. So now I'm going to actually move on to a part of the stool. What I'm going to be turning next is one of these, which is the stretcher for it. Yeah.
This is going to be hypothetically a picture frame.
Yep.
You need two more of these, right?
Yes, and usually those would be slightly longer.
Okay.
So
you're not going to make them identical, so you don't have to replicate
yes.
the profile.
Mm-hmm.
You make up a new one.
Yeah, you can do a complementing one. So that top bead, you want the same, because that's where they're going to join together.
Got it.
But for the length of it, you can do a slightly different design, but with the same style. Same sort of shape beads, same sort of curves, but just a different design.
So is there an easier way to try to remember how to replicate it? I mean, do you put a drawing down in front of you?
Yes. What I generally do, like for one of those, which is what I'm going to show here, is because it's a symmetrical piece. So what I do is I do one side, and then I take calipers, measure certain dimensions, and then invert that over, and that creates a symmetrical piece. And then using that as a template, I can use that to make another one if I have to. And this, it would just be, you need two spindles that complement each other, that are symmetrical to themselves. So in that case, I would do one side, caliper, and then flip it over. And I'll be showing how to do that with this project. So, all right, for doing this, because it needs to go into a fair, yeah.
So you mentioned you didn't quite split the thing down the middle. Does that ever really matter? And if it did matter, how would you recover from it?
So, can you recover from that? Not quite. Unless you were to sand down both pieces and to make them somewhat more symmetrical. Because let me forgot a piece right here, so I can draw what I did wrong. So I have the cardboard that's going straight across.
You got a whiteboard behind you.
Oh, yeah, I probably would. So I had that. Then I have that cardboard going right down the center. I need it to be right here where my center was. When I put that on the lathe, I accidentally put the center here. So now I have the circle based off of there, not right on. That's terrible. But not based on the cardboard. So when I split them, they're not perfect half circles. What I could do is sand them down so they're both the same thickness. Or throw it in the fireplace and start over. Which is sometimes the better option.
What is a piece of furniture you would be making where you really need it to be in on center?
It usually does matter. Rich asked, what sort of project does it really matter that they're off-center? And generally most projects, because that's enough off that you can see it with the naked eye. So if I'm using both of those in the same piece, you can see one's thicker than the other one. It's like a picture frame would not work, especially when you do the joints. They're going to be off. Or if you're doing those for like trim on a piece of furniture, they would be off. And also because it's a small piece of wood, it's not a big deal if you just throw it in the fireplace. Generally, when I'm doing a natural project, I do a sample piece out of Douglas fir 2x2s for a couple reasons. Number one is I want to make sure my pattern looks good before I actually do it in the good wood. But also, 2x2 Douglas fir will not let you get away with anything. So if you're turning something like nice maple or like a rosewood, because it has such a nice smooth texture, it's pretty forgiving. So if you go a little bit into the end grain, do a little bit of scraping, it looks fine. But if you do it on Douglas fir, it shreds up. So it's a great practice wood. Alrighty, so for the next project, I'm going to use this little piece of hickory. So hickory is not the easiest thing in the world to turn, but I'm using it for the stools because you really want something nice and strong. I would not use any material softer than walnut, and walnut I think would be kind of pushing it. Because when you think of the abuse that a chair or a stool suffers, you'll see a lot of like chairs in restaurants that are made out of cheap softwoods from Southeast Asia. And eventually those joints, they just loosen up, they'll break off, where something like an oak or a hickory, ash, maple, they perform really well. Or if you want to be real fancy, you can pull out the rosewood and really make it snazzy. So in this case, later I'll be doing one where accuracy more matters for getting the center of these, but I'm just going to do them real rough. So I'm going to put it on the tool rest, use that as a straight edge, and just draw corner to corner. Well, yeah, with me starting at woodworking and turning at 15, I've discovered a lot of real funky ways to do things, especially when you're doing things on basically no budget. Yeah, it's kind of funny when I look at my shop these days. There's certain tools that I still don't have. It's just because I've come up with workarounds. And with the cheap ways. I do a lot of pin turning, and so usually they make a little tapered metal tool to glue the brass barrels into the wood. Well, I was always too cheap to spend $8 on that, so I always used antler points with a plastic bag over the end, and I still do that. So I'm taking this spur center out. A quick thing about these ones. These are really nice centers. This is what's called a steb center. So it has a little spring-loaded point and a whole bunch of teeth here. These are really nice because they don't sink into the wood very much. Though also, if you do not tighten this enough and turning pretty aggressively and it slides, it'll actually cut itself a nice little groove in there, and then these points will stop engaging because it's wedging along these the sides of the spikes. And then you can't get traction no matter what you do. Sometimes you have to go to the drill press and take a Forstner bit, drill down a little further to get those points into the wood again. But I'm going to be switching over to a different one. Because I have small little ends that need to fit into the holes in the legs of my stool, I have this little tiny spur center. This is one of the standard 4-prong bits that would come in when you bought a 4-prong drive is kind of the standard, and if you buy a lathe, it's going to have a 4-prong, but generally they're about 3/4 of an inch in diameter. This is a 3/8. So, where did I put the wood? There's the wood. Alrighty. Melt this up. Also, another big thing that makes this sort of turning a lot easier is a good live center. This one's the one that comes with the robusts, but One Way makes a really nice one. Powermatic makes a nice one, and there's a few companies that also make pretty good ones. But the thing is, most live centers are much too big to do this type of turning. And this is a cup center. So it has this nice little ring around, and then it has the point in the center. A lot of the centers that you see are just a cone center. And the issue with those is they like to drive into the wood. And if you're doing small parts, they can split them apart. So the cup centers really do a good job. But most of the cup centers you would find, like if you bought a new jet lathe, they would come with a cup center that's about as big a diameter as this part of this center. And for doing this kind of fine work, it's really hard to do them with those. And then if you have big centers like that, then you have to glue another piece of wood on the end to get longer, or calculate into your design that you're going to have a certain amount that you need to cut off the ends. It's really convenient if you can just go to a chop saw, cut them all perfectly the right length, and then just turn them. And then just the spur center point will actually be hidden inside the joinery of your stool, so it doesn't really matter. Tighten that up good. Make sure it's not sliding. Any questions? Yes?
What determines the speed that you use on the spindle? And then how does that affect?
That's a great question.
What is the question?
It's how does the speed affect your turning, and what does it mean? How do you determine the speed? So the faster you turn, the more efficient the cut is going to be. So more cutting action occurs in the same time frame. But that's also locked in your feed rate. So if your lathe is turning real slow, you're going to advance the tool real slow. If the lathe is turning faster, you can advance the tool faster. So generally, the higher RPMs are more efficient, but it gets to a point where it gets to be a safety issue. And the smaller pieces, like this size, I can crank my lathe all the way up and it will be fine. Because it's such a small diameter piece, there's not that much surface RPMs. Surface, I forget the name of it. Thank you. But if you're doing something big like a bowl, you really need to slow that down, especially because in a bowl, you might be throwing out a big chunk of a log. And if it's unbalanced and you turn it up high speeds, your lathe is going to walk away from you. Or worse yet, a piece is going to come flying off. So generally what people do is they start turning slow to get it balanced, and then they turn the RPM up after it's balanced, and you see what's going on. So if you're doing like a big bowl, you want to start slow, make sure you know what pieces of bark are going to come off, what aren't, and then you want to turn it up later. A lot of it is personal preference. I'm a pretty fast turner. Doesn't mean that's the right way to do it. Doesn't mean that's the wrong way to do it. It's just what you're comfortable with. No problem. Yeah.
Rate affect the dullness of the tool?
Not particularly, because you're still cutting through the same amount of material at the end of the day. And that's also a great point talking about how quick the tools dull. With turning, the tools dull very quickly. Because if you did the math and calculated how many miles of wood your turning tool is going through, it really dulls them pretty quick. So that's why the quality turning tools really come into play. And a lot of times like the cheap Craftsman high carbon steel tools don't perform that well generally. Yes?
How often do you sharpen your tools?
Also an excellent and very complicated question. A lot of it depends, he asked, how often do I sharpen my tools? The short answer is whenever I think I might need to. If there's any thought in your mind that you need to sharpen your tools, you need to sharpen your tools. But the actual amount of material you go through really varies on the species and if it's green or if it's dry. Green wood, you can go through a lot more wood before you need to sharpen compared to dry wood. But if I'm turning something like ironwood, teak, anything with a high silica content, it's going to shred the edge. Or if I'm doing something where a big root ball where I find some rocks in there, or if I discover some nails, of course that's going to take a chunk out of them. But one thing is also very interesting about turning tools, because most of them are out of M2 high-speed steel, is actually the steel doesn't bother them that much, but the rocks definitely will. And yeah, in some woods, I mean, they're very brutal due to the chemical composition inside them. It's usually not the density that gets them, it's the minerals that are in them. Yep, silica. Yes, did you have a question back there?
Yes, so for example, you're turning these things. How many would you turn before you would sharpen your tool? So with this hickory, probably around, about 4. With the cherry, 3 perhaps. Or sorry, flip that. So no, it would be a little. Also, one fact about this is some woods are also more forgiving about how sharp your edge is than others. Like the hickory, for example, it's less forgiving because it's a coarser wood. If your tools aren't perfectly sharp, it's going to be a bit of an issue. The cherry, being a real smooth wood, it's really pretty forgiving. But I'd probably do around 6 of these spindles before I would sharpen. It also depends the kind of tool steel in your tool. The M2 lasts way longer than a cheap tool you get off Amazon or a super cheap tool from Harbor Freight. Where my nice tools like a Doug Thompson or a Carter & Sons, they're going to last a bit longer than the M2. But there's a big difference between the M2 high-speed steel and the cheap ones. There's a huge difference there, and a bit of a difference between the M2 and the really expensive steels. So, yeah. Yep. 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 Exactly. Yeah, you'll know it immediately. And it's like the one thing I cannot talk about here is how much pressure you're applying to the wood. And the pressure really comes with the muscle memory. And you'll notice you're putting more pressure in to get the same result. And when you're doing that, you know it's time to sharpen. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and round this one off. Crank that ball away. Talking a little about the speed. So if I'm turning super slow to do that same cut, and I'm turning a third of the speed I was before. The only difference is just how fast you're going forward. Cool. So there we go. I'm around. So in this case, I made a little template for doing these parts. I generally don't rely as much on the actual curves here because it can be a bit mind-numbing to try to match each curve perfectly. What I generally do is I take the dimensions, I apply those to the wood, and then I do the beads and everything in between until it looks just about right. It is stuff by hand, so if it's a little bit off, just add to the character, I guess. Unless there's certain dimensions that you absolutely need, like the 17.5 millimeter to fit into your the holes in the legs of the stool. I realize not everybody might use the metric system, but I really like using millimeters for this kind of work. So you have to bear with me. Alrighty, so this is a pair of calipers that I rounded the tips on for doing this sort of sizing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this at, make sure it's zeroed.
at 17.5. There we go. Good enough. Tighten this screw down as much as I can because this is a wonderful craftsmanship of Harbor Freight. It's not a very good locking screw. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the parting tool, and I'm going to size the tenons on each end of that spindle. I'll put that here, in case I need to reference it later. So I'm going to hold this on the back side. This is where it's really important to have the nice rounded tips, because if they're pointed, they'll catch and going to have a bad time. So I'll put it like there. There we are. And there's my size for my tenon. So I'm going to go over here on this side. There we are. So now what I'm going to do is, where'd my template go? There it is. One measurement I actually don't have on here is this 17.5 lasts for 20 millimeters. So I'm going to take this, set this to 20 millimeters. Also, these are rounded, and these ones are sharpened. So I can use these for scoring. So I'll set that at 20 mils. Turn it back on. Line it up to the edge. Try not to do that. So I held that up a little too high angle and it pulled down. So we want to negative rake these. Cool. So now I'll set this back to 17.5. There we go, good enough. Crank that sucker down. I'll do a little bit more. All right, there's the tenons. Now for the fun part. The problem with face shields, you can't blow the dust away. All right, so for the first bead, it's going to be, let's see where that's at. The top of the first bead is going to be in 58 millimeters. So now I'll go ahead. All right, and they are going to be 25 millimeters in diameter. So I'll set that at 25 somewhere. Good enough. So because it's the same sort of thing with a curve for the saw blade, I'm going to go this side of that line. But you know what? I'll go the other side. There we are. All right, there's that dimension. So now I'm going to take my spindle gouge and cut this out. And so I'm going to cut this slope right here and roll this bead. I'm going to pull out a different spindle gouge. A little bigger one. Putting that away to give myself a little bit of clearance. And I'm going to take that and spot. Sneak up on it. Excellent. All right, so there's that. Now I need to see how far it is to the edge of my bead. That's going to be 60 millimeters. All right. Is that right? That is right. Huh. Cool. And so at the bottom of this is going to be 12 millimeters. All right. Let's see where I'm at. I got it. Ugh. So that's going to be, what is that? 16. So I need to go down another 4 millimeters. Any questions so far? You good? Sure. What's that?
I was wondering about your design. Is this something you just made up in your head? Did you have a pattern to follow, or how did you come up with it?
Yeah, I just came up with it. Some of the best ones come from just taking the 2x2s on the lathe and seeing what looks good. Let's see where we're at over here. 14. Need more. think that'll a little more here. Let's see. That's a little thin there, actually. That one's not bad. Cool. I'll just go with it. So now, what do we got next? So I have another little taper here. Those are going to be $81 from the edge. $82 actually. And they're going to be where are those at? Yeah, 22 millimeters in diameter. Good enough. All right. Also, another thing that's really helpful when you first get started turning, practice turning with both hands. Because in this situation, being right-handed, doing this is easy. Doing this, it's kind of hard. So getting into the habit of switching hands when you first get started, it's not that weird because everything's going to be weird. So great habit to get in. It makes you much more versatile of a turner. All right. And also, if you, yes, you had a question?
What's your opinion about the carbide insert tools?
I really don't like them for most things. They're fantastic for when you're doing certain materials, like if you're doing an inlay into it, like if you have the turquoise. They're great for removing that. But they have such a limiting cutting dynamic because they're just a scraper. This is a carbide scraper. And because the carbide is lower on the periodic table of the elements, so it's a bigger particle, it cannot get as sharp as a high-speed steel can. Just like a high-speed steel can't get as sharp as a very simple high-carbon steel. But I find that there's so much of a difference between the edge quality that the advantage of having the better edge retention doesn't help all that much. I'd rather sharpen a little more and get a better surface quality than not sharpen in a month and have a mediocre finish across the whole thing. They are fantastic for doing hollow forms. So if you have one that's doing the inside, they're great for those. But I mean, they have a place. But I find a lot of people are attracted to like the easy wood tools because they are easier. Because they're scrapers, you just stick them in and they cut. But I find a lot of times people pigeonhole themselves into those tools and don't learn how to use the traditional turning tools. And then they spend hours sanding it, and it's just better to spend the time, figure these ones out, and get the better surface quality. That's my opinion on it. Let me get this other dimension. But also those scrapers, one thing you can do with those is you also, if you angle them on their sides, so you get more of a shearing cut, you can get a better surface quality out of them. They're still not fantastic though.
So do you end up sanding your pieces when you're done?
Depends what I'm doing. A lot of stuff I'll actually, instead of sanding it, I'll torch them or do carving on it for my personal work. Or it depends. Like if you get a perfect surface quality out of doing your spindle gouge, you don't really need to do much sanding. But if you do have some problem spots, it's good to sand it out. Were you ready for the break? Is that what you're saying?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Perfect. I can get this done in 5 minutes. Measurement here. One more. Yeah. All right. Oh, one little mess up. Let me clean that up. That's just embarrassing. All right. So there's the stretcher. I will have to admit, one of my least favorite parts of turning is the duplication part. Because when I first got started with wood turning, I did it to escape the numbers.
Okay, maybe one final question. So where are you along in making that three-legged stool?
So I'm just got one of the stretchers. So just to make a full project, I need to get 2 more of these.
Okay,
But for the demo, I have 1 leg and 1 top to do.
got it. Okay, so we'll take any more questions?
Yes.
I didn't notice when you put the stock into the lathe, was it glued up or a solid?
It's a solid piece.
And do you find there's any big difference or any You know, you usually go glued up versus solid stuff.
Well, if I'm doing a glued up piece, I do thin layers to get that nice laminated look. I don't like to just do two pieces stuck together because it looks like you just didn't have thick enough lumber. But if you laminate them, they're more stable. So it all of it depends on the aesthetic you're looking for. And this one I wanted to do nice solid wood all the way through. But it's also kind of cool to do them, kind of make your own spectroply and do some 1/8" strips of some exotics, glue those together, and those hold up really well. They're thin enough pieces that the glue soaks in a good percentage of how thick it is, so they're really, really strong. Yes?
I don't own a lathe, nor do I have room for it in my shop. So is there someone in your club, whether it's you or someone else, that would do commission work if I needed a spindle made at an hourly rate?
Yep, I'm sure you can find scare some people up for you.
And what would I expect to be an hourly rate for doing lathe work?
You, $100.
A lot of it just depends on the person, and probably the piecework would probably be more accurate versus the time, because then then it's not weird if they mess up something and then have to take a little longer to do it, and if it just makes it a little bit more clear cut. Any more questions?
All right, so let's reconvene in 15 minutes. Oh,
Yes, Dale?
Question, Bill Derby does custom turning.
Does he still do that?
Huh?
Does he still do the turning, custom turning?
As far as I know.
Okay.
So is this a comment or a question?
It's a comment.
Comment.
For the stool, so I already went ahead and marked this center right here, and I glue another piece of wood on here because I pre-cut my wedge. This was one of those discovery moments with this other stool right here. So what you'll notice is these have off-center feet. One of them right here, which I'll be showing in a couple minutes. And notice that they're slightly crooked on here. So what I did is I cut the slot for the wedge before or after I had turned it. And it's with a nice round surface like this, it's hard to get it perfect. So in the lighting in my shop, it looked about right. When I took it and put it all together, it was a bit off. So in this case, if I cut this first, then I know it's more accurate because this face right here, I cut that off of, you can see right here, it has a slight angle on it. Because in this base plate, it's a 10-degree angle, so I have a 10-degree angle down here on the foot. Also, another discovery moment, the wedge slot. Don't just do a straight slot, straight wedge in here. Have this little recess down here, like take a drill bit, or in this case I just took the bandsaw and widened it out a little bit there, because that widens the point of stress. So instead of when you drive the wedge down and split it real nice like I did over here, it makes it so it's a little more flexible so it can expand more because there's less wood in there, and it's not focused all on one single point. Also, there's some other learning opportunities for that wedge that I'll be covering later once I do the top. But now I need to do these, do the markings for the foot, because for the off-center foot. Never lock this thing down. There we go. Alrighty, so I need two centers on here. I need the true center, the center of this piece of stock, and then I'm going to do an off-center point. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of average it out and see where we're at. Sorry about that.
What are you using to determine your off-center mark?
Let me cover that in 1 second. So I got the true center now. Let me take a center and punch it before I lose track of it. All right, there's the true center. Now for the off-center one, what really matters is how wide do I want my leg to be down by the base. And I'll take that and half it. So in this case, I'm going to do about 1.25 inches. No, 1.1 inches. So I will do just a hair over. There we are. And now I just take this, slide that over, and that's going to be my off-center point. Cool. Oh, that's sure. So I did that a little off-center, so I'm just going to try to push it back the other way. Looks a little better. Cool. So now, put that away. Put this away. Mount it over here. And so now, I'm going to mount it on my off-center point.
The other end is at the true center all the time, is that right?
Yes. And this, for doing these kind of little pad foots, that always stays constant. For other types of off-center work, that's going to change as well. So if I'm doing an oval piece, I would just do 2 points that are even, both sides, turn in one position, then move it forward laterally, and do it like that. Or you can get real fancy and have 3 points, and then do a twist. So yeah, that's probably another demo.
You need a milk carton for it.
Ain't that good? Looking good. All right. So now I'm just going to go ahead and rough it out and get going. Any more questions? Cool.
What speed do you start when you're offsetting like this?
It depends. Depends how off-center I am. And this one, I would feel pretty confident starting at 1500 and then revving it up from there. If I'm doing bigger diameter stuff, or if I'm doing something really dumb, I'll turn it down a little lower. But also, in this case, it's just one section that's off-center, and it's not off-center all that much. So I'm not going to notice a whole lot of vibration. If I'm doing something real extreme, like if I'm doing an off-center top, so if I'm making an oval top or a three-sided top, then it's going to be more out of balance because there's more mass. But it's really interesting with pieces being out of balance, with how easy and how hard it is to get a piece that's actually out of balance. Like sometimes you have pieces of pine that if you have a big knot on it, just that will make it rattle real good. Or other pieces like this where you're shifting the center of mass over, but it really doesn't affect all that much. So it's interesting. That's doing this kind of work is why a variable speed lathe is very handy. Because if you're doing it with a variable speed, you can just turn it on, and if it starts to get oh shit like that, I can turn it down. Where if I don't, then I have to turn it off, I have to change the belts, and do all that.
So one of the reasons why vacuum is $5,000 is because it has all these.
Yeah, yeah, but also you can get fairly inexpensive lathes that have that capacity too. You can get small jets that have variable speed these days. Variable speed seems to be kind of all the rage right now, and you can get most lathes with variable speed. But also they do make conversions to take a pre-existing lathe and to turn it into a variable speed. Gotta have to be kind of careful with those, because I've seen those conversions make the lathe lose all its torque. And they're then it's a lathe that's nice variable speed that you can only use for pins, which then which you're going to be turning it up all the way anyway. All right. So in this case, I'm going to be leaving this section alone, and I'm just going to be turning all this round, and then I'll come back to over here. You can see this nice interrupted cut, how it's bouncing. That's why the faster speeds are really nice. Because if I slow this down a lot, the rattle stops, but now it's a lot more challenging to do. So I'm going to turn that up a little more. Ooh. Didn't quite tighten this enough. That tool rest almost came over and stuck in the wood. And if you're going to stick your tool rest in your wood, you might as well sharpen it. I haven't done that today. Ah. Get the tool rest over.
So we can't get the whole length in the overhead. But, at least the
How much can you get?
slide the leg over.
We could. Do you guys want to slide the lathe over or no? Alrighty. I have to say it's the first time I've done this with this lathe, with this kind of funky little extension here, and it's pretty weird. It's like hanging off the edge of a cliff. All right. So now I can go ahead and do the tenon for to stick into the seat of the stool. Calipers, 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 calipers. So these hole is going to be, call that 32 millimeters.
He asked the question, we were answering.
Oh, this is going to be entertaining because I'm rubbing this on there, but there's a hole in there for the wedge. So we'll see if this is going to bite me or not. Cool. Did not expect that to work. A little loose there. Cool. See how long this is. See if it's going to be big enough to get through it. Probably do need to do a little longer. There we go. So, okay, it's going to take about 50 millimeter to get through. So I need to make it a bit longer. Alrighty. Put that back to the, what was that again? All right. So there's that. So now I'm going to take a look. So in this case, I'm not doing any duplication of this. This is just a free-form leg, so to speak. So I can do anything I want. for this first one, and then I would match all the other ones to this one. So in this case, I'm going to do it very similar to those ones. I'm going to do a little bit of a beat here, and then I'm just going to do a nice long taper to here, and then have the pad foot, I think. But sure is nice not to have to duplicate anything. There it is. So I'll roll a bead here. Work. You know what? For giggles, I'll do a second bead. A little bit smaller. Cool. So now I'm just going to do a nice taper from here. So I can move this over. Right. So we're done with that section over here. Let's move that a little over here out of the way of that.
Mike, would you line your tool rest center of the turn or high or low on the center?
In this case right here, I actually have it awfully high. Probably need to lower this down a little bit. But where it's best to do is have when you put the tool in the tool rest and you're cutting, you want the tool to be cutting above center or right on it. Right on it is generally preferable. But with the roughing gouge, you can get away with it pretty good. Once we start using the bowl gouge on the top, it gets really important to make sure your tool is cutting on center. But a little above is fine. Under, you're going to have a bad time. Also, right now, I'm getting away with it because I'm doing really light cuts, but with something this long and skinny, generally you're going to get vibration. And there's a couple tricks to get around that, especially when you're doing really skinny. When you're doing something of this size, one of the easiest tricks is, so when you're turning, if you take this hand and support the back side. So if I'm pressing hard, you're going to get some vibration, and then you can just support it on the back side. And that works really well. Also, there is the spindle steady rests, which is it's a frame with 3 arms that go toward the center with little roller skate wheels, essentially. And those work pretty good, but you're going to have time to set them up. But they're going to be much more stable than just putting your hand around the back side. Actually, I don't know if it was mentioned. I mentioned it earlier, but also I volunteer a bit at Valley High School, help them out with lathe work and general woodworking. So if I have a kid who's doing something really long and skinny, I'll actually take a piece of plywood and stand behind it and just press against the back side to help support it. Just counteract that force of putting the tool on. The other thing is if you just do super, super light touches, that also helps. But in this case, I'm getting away with it, and I'm not sure why. It's been really good. What's that? Yeah. When I turned those legs, I got the vibration. This one I didn't, though. I don't know. There you can hear that vibration now. That's it. So. Excellent. That looks pretty nice. So now I'm going to go ahead and work on the foot. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move the center over back to the true center. The true center of the stock. The more center. And now I have this nice curve that I got from my turning the leg. What I need to do is I need to follow this outer edge all the way over, and that should be the where it needs to be. After I cut there, I'll turn it off and I'll see. And if I need to trim a little bit more off the shaft to make sure that they line up good, because if I go too far into the too far down, I'll start. Actually, I'll turn it off and show. So if I turn too far this way, I'm going to have one cylinder here and then one cylinder here, and there's going to be a little step there. But so when I don't know if you guys can see it on the camera, where I'm looking here, I can see a kind of a ghost edge. And that's the farthest extent that the wood is swinging to. And if I don't cut into that and I blend this perfectly over, there's not going to be any joint right here. So right here, I left this a little fat. Right here, I cut a little into it. So, and a lot of those you can, after the fact, you can blend a little bit with sandpaper and kind of fudge it a little bit. Also, one trick for turning a fairly straight cylinder is if you put your finger on the tool rest and then set the tool rest up parallel to your workpiece. And you use that as a basically a depth gauge for the tool, and you just slide your hand on the tool rest. Let's take a look. Looks pretty good. There's a little bit of a flat here, so I need to go a little further. But then I'll come back over here to the off-center point and true this up and get this a little bit smaller. See if that'll work. Pretty good. You see right here, I hit that a little. But I could sand a little bit right there and you never notice. Cool. So that's, oh darn it, there's a little bit of one right there. That's okay, I can fix that. How close am I? Actually, that'll be fine. So this is all going to be waste. Perfect. So now I put it back to the... Oh, I didn't see that. Okay, a little further. So I'll have to go down a little bit further in diameter here to match up with that. But that's just fine. So, cut this one. Let's take a look. There we go. A little bit. Take one cut. That's also a kind of a Turner's joke. One more cut. So it's just like when you're doing a bowl, for example. You get it down nice and thin. There's a little line at the bottom. Just one more cut. And you go in there, you botch that one, and you go right through and you make a nice little funnel. There we go. I was going to true up this face right there. I think we'll be good. Here we go. All right, and at this point, I'll go ahead and sand it. But for the sake of not creating a huge dust cloud here, I'm not going to do that. So there's a foot. And then I would just knock this piece off. And also one thing, this piece is actually a side grain piece of wood, so the grain's running this way, which makes it easier for me to take that big Japanese hatchet and just lop it off. It'll shear with the grain. So cool. So there's a leg. I can pass this around. Pass that way.
So the part you're talking about knocking off is a separate piece that you glued on.
Exactly. I put that piece of wood on there because I have that wedge already cut in there. So if I just put my center in there, there's going to be no place for it to line out perfectly. So, yeah. Alrighty, so I'm going to take 1 second. I'm going to take that extension, put it back on here, and then we'll go ahead and make the top. Also, yeah, working at a wood store, we're going to cross a lot of really nasty smelling woods. And the worst one I found is marble wood. Oh, God. Has anybody worked with marble wood before? Oh, it's terrible, isn't it?
It's elm.
Yeah, elm. Cottonwood's pretty nasty, too. So now I'm going to go ahead and knock this out and throw on my chuck. So I'm just have a screw in the chuck, a screw chuck in here. You can mount this in many different ways. I have a waste block on here, so I'm not removing any of this to have a good mounting system. I've also done this just between centers, but it's a little bit of a pain in the ass. So that threads right on that hole I have in the center.
Michael, do you ever take the time to round that off with a bandsaw?
Yeah, usually. Most of the time at home I use I just take my chop saw into a hexagon. In this case, I was running late this morning and I forgot to do it. Which is going to be interesting because I'm running a little short on time, so. Cool. All right, so I'm going to mount my tool rest at about a 45, maybe, if I can. I'll get some of that knocked off. So I'm just going to, yes.
Is that a work drive on the back?
Yes, it is. Yep.
What kind of glue did you do? Type 1-3?
Yep.
Newspaper or straight on?
Straight on. Let's turn that all the way down. Turn that up. So I'll move the tool rest further ahead. Where'd that chunk come out of? Hey, that was a perfect place for it to come out of. All right. I'm going to turn the speed up a little bit. See where we're at round-wise. We're pretty round. So now I'm going to start shaping the top. I'll do this top, just a slight dish, then I'll come around. I'm actually going to put a roughly 10-degree angle going this way. So when I put the legs in, they somewhat match up with the top. Yes. Was that? Not yet.
Are you always constantly aware of the sound of it too? Because I noticed the sound differences.
Yes.
So you're paying attention to the sound as
Mhm.
well as how it's coming?
Yep. Also, one thing about that, actually at my own shop, I wear hearing protection as well. Because this thing is actually loud enough after a day's turning to do damage. But you can still hear enough of that sound with hearing protection. But yeah, the sort of cut you're making changes the sound. If you're doing the cut wrong, you can hear it. And also you can feel a lot of that too. Exactly. Cool, so I'm gonna get this front face good to go because I'm running probably over time now. But I'll try to get this done really quick. Oh, I didn't see that. Oh well. Yeah. See how that looks. A little bit of a flat. I'll whack that out real quick. That looks pretty okay. Yes. I'm using a bowl gouge. More specifically, it's a 1/2-inch swept back bowl gouge, also known as like an Irish or an English grind. Yes.
The concave element, how did you do that?
The concave. So I did this. This is basically a bowl, really. It's going to be concave on the front, convex on the back. And this one I just did a push cut here.
Oh, you
Same
did
as
it on the leg.
Yes. Oh, which one? Which convex? Which one are you referring to?
Concave on that side.
On this side?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Because I noticed it was already.
Mm-hmm. That one because hickory warps so much when it dries, it had a bit of one.
Okay.
Which doesn't matter because there's already going to be high spots anyway, so it doesn't actually help you at all. It's just because hickory is a funny wood. But apparently it doesn't like me. Jeez.
Mike would say a first aid kit and your Turner supply here.
There is.
Yeah, I'll get to it later. I'm almost done. Move that a little closer.
I'll need to.
Have I got blood on anything or?
No, just sawdust.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I didn't pick the answer. On your waist piece, you also just have that glued in, and you also have a screw into it?
Yes. And that I use the screw just because it's easy to just drill a hole right in the center of the piece and just thread that in. You could also use a faceplate, or you could already glue it onto a chalk, or glue it onto use a chalk and put a tenon on it and then glue that on. Well, due to the fact that I'm grossly over time, I'm sure, I'm going to go ahead and call it. And if you guys have any questions, you can just come up and see me. At this point, I would just continue to go down further until I just have a little bit left. Then I can just cut that off. And when I got it down real small, I would sand the whole piece. I would cut down a little bit more here, so it's just a little bit of a nub. And also, one thing I do use these, I often use cabinet scrapers. You can run, I'll just show this before it ends. You can run these like this. and clean it up a little bit?
Do one more, please. The camera
Okay.
was switching over.
Okay, sorry. So, yeah,
Can you use that as the parting tool I was talking to you about?
sure.
Okay,
You could regrind one of these and
that's what I lost.
yes.
What's the advantage of putting the holes in for the feet before you turn the top?
I did that just so I wouldn't have to worry about trying to find the center again and line it up because it was really easy for me with a square block to drill those accurately. You could very easily do it the other way. Part of the thing is because these are tapered holes. So I have to drill those in from the top. And in this orientation, I wanted to have a curved bottom. So it would be the issue of the rocking where it'd be really easy to put an angle on the drill press and just do an angled spade bit through the top. And that worked pretty good.
What did you say, it was a 10-degree angle?
10 degree. Though 15 probably would look pretty good too. 45 might be a little much.
So, let's thank Michael.